Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are going to be talking about the extraordinary Book of Thoth by Aleister Crowley, our own thoughts and experiences with it. So this is going to be a lot of fun for us. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. And again, thank you guys so much for supporting our show. We've had a couple of fans reach out to us and tell us how much they enjoy it, and that means the world to us. So we're happy you guys are finding it interesting, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. So we're definitely going to keep going, as long as we're able. And I think it's going to be just a lot of interesting guests in our future. We have some great shows coming up. We're still kind of solidifying our schedule for September, so there'll be some more announcements coming down the road about that in the next couple of weeks. But we are going to have Krista's dad back on, and we're going to be talking about some of the psychic experiences that we've all had. So I think that'll be fascinating. And then October, we're going to have a great lineup of shows in October. We have Mystic Mitten coming back on, and they've just inherited a collection of haunted dolls from a funeral home, if I understand correctly. And we're going to talk about haunted dolls. So that should be a lot of fun for October. And our good friend, Madame Zalima, is going to be back on talking about the Day of the Dead. And it's a big thing here in Los Angeles and the Latino culture. So that should be great. And our good friend Jackie Smith will be on also talking about Samhain and some of the pagan ritual around that part of the year. So all you guys that are into paganism and witchcraft and haunted things, then October's our month to do a lot of that stuff. So we're excited about that. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. A few of you have done that, and we really appreciate it. Helps us cover some of our costs for producing the show, and makes us feel nice that people are supporting us. And if you can't afford it, enjoy the show anyway. We're here to do it regardless, and we just want you guys to really have fun. We don't want this to be just a moneymaker. We want it to be for the right reasons, but that doesn't mean we don't appreciate paying our bills either. It's nice to do that. And sign up for our newsletter. There'll be one coming out in September. You'll see the link there to be able to do that, and we're going to have some links to some of our favorite episodes, maybe some other cool stuff that we find on the web. And we're going to do that quarterly, so it'll be four episodes or editions a year that will come out in your email. So I promise not a lot of spam, and we're not going to try and sell you anything, just to kind of share some things with you guys. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Krista, and I'm really excited to be doing this show. Crowley is always just a fascinating topic, and the Book of Thoth, I've often said that we wouldn't be who we are without it, that it was probably the most influential book I read on the tarot. Not an easy read, as I've always said. It's the good news it's by Crowley, and the bad news it's by Crowley. So, but we'll try and demystify a little of it and help you understand how to come to it the right way. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to you, Krista. So let's get into the Book of Thoth.
Awesome. So first of all, when I first read this book, I had no background in any of Western magic, no lingo. I had not studied it. And so it was definitely very challenging just from that point of view. The book itself was originally published in a limited edition of 200 numbered and signed copies in 1944. And it has since then had other sort of editions and printings of it. So most of the editions I have are the paperback, that they recently did this beautiful facsimile of the original one. It's gorgeous with some of the plates, the color plates, and it's gorgeous. If you can get it, it's still available. So the structure of the book, just to briefly go over it. Now the book is, we're assuming the Book of Thoth goes with his beautiful cards that were painted by Lady Frieda Harris. And I think that Crowley really wanted people to read the book with the cards because it is not just a tarot deck for him. It is his signature work in a sense, because he's announcing through this deck, the new Aeon of Horus. And again, you don't really need to know that to work with the cards, but you will start to want to know that. So it's a tricky thing, the tarot is visual, and I think that any way you enter into the world of Crowley is fine. So, I mean, I sort of can tell you that's, the way I went in was knowing absolutely nothing about him except that he had a reputation. That's about it. So the book itself has 4 parts in it. It's structured. The first part is the theory of the tarot, which is really kind of fascinating, and we'll talk about some of that. I'll go over some of my favorite parts of that. Then he does part 2, which is the A2 or keys or trumps. Part 3 are the court cards. Part 4, the small cards are what he called the minor cards. Then he has some invocations and mnemonics, a bunch of plates, and 2 appendixes. And that completes the book, which is a little shy of 300 pages. So when I first read the book, as I said, I didn't know anything about it. And I think I read it maybe within the first 2 years of when I was doing the tarot professionally. So that would make it maybe about, 18, 19, maybe 20 years ago. And it reminds me of when I was in school and I went back to school to study marine biology, and I hadn't read any math or science for 10 years, and my brain hurt, I had to get used to reading it. So the first suggestion I have for anyone that's just a regular sort of lay person approaching that book is to just go ahead and read it and read the parts you can read, and the parts that seem a little dense or convoluted, which they are. There are some parts that are convoluted for most people. I mean, it's not, there are sort of layers of convolution in it because Crowley was, very smart, and the book itself has, sort of terms that you might not recognize right away. He also likes to use certain language to sort of hide things. He can be very clear sometimes, and actually as a writer, a little convoluted on top of it all. But I definitely got something from it the first time, even though there are parts I felt like I was falling asleep through because I did not understand it. And so you just kind of let it sink in and kind of go for it, and don't be intimidated by the things you don't know, because even people that know Crowley will say certain parts are difficult. Do you agree with that, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. It's a challenging read. As I said, when I first did it, I read it cover to cover, and I got to the end of it, and I realized I didn't have a freaking clue what I just read, and went back and started pulling bits and pieces out of it. And as we've talked too, I think that with Crowley, he sort of had vows of secrecy that he was sort of violating to a degree by writing a lot of this stuff. And I think that he sort of hid things in gibberish is the way I like to put it. And it seems like you'll look at a section of the book and there'll be this whole bunch of stuff that doesn't really mean anything. And then somewhere like one sentence that does actually mean something. And so you have to kind of, I think, sometimes pierce through the gibberish a little bit to get to the good part. So you've got to be watchful for that. And I think that was his way of kind of hiding things in plain sight. So if you were initiate, you would know where to look for the answer in that information. And if not, then it would be overwhelming or deceptive if you weren't up to the task. So it makes it a little challenging. And he uses a lot of different references. But again, when I look at the book, where we are today as readers, we wouldn't be where we are without it. I think especially the way it connects to the Kabbalah changed our way of looking at the tarot completely. I think that there are just gems in there of information. And I think that once you sort of start to get one thing to make a little sense, then the next thing starts to make a little bit more sense. And eventually it sort of comes into view and it all comes together. So that was at least my experience on it. I don't know about you.
Well, interesting enough, in the introduction, he basically warns you that this is going to be a reflection of his magical mind. And so what's interesting about both him and Lady Frieda Harris is really this book and deck are a culmination of their entire life. And so they put so much work into it when the project that was going to be like 3 or 4 months turned out to be 5 years, with Lady Frieda Harris repainting, one card 6 or 7 or 8 times and willingly doing it. So you're really looking at the distillation of Crowley's work, and also Lady Frieda Harris. So that's one of the things he actually kind of warns you in the beginning, in the sort of the very sort of in beginning of the book. There's a little bio and a little reason why he wrote this book, and he he says he succeeded in uniting under the schema of the Holy Kabbalah, of which the tarot is the greatest single element, all philosophical and magical systems soever, including that of the Chinese. So no wonder it's dense. And at least his intention is to unite a lot of different systems. And you can start learning his particular tarot by working with any of the systems first, which is what I've never really, for instance, worked with the I Ching element of the cards, but it's in there. So
yeah, there's also the thing I like about it too is that the way he does see it as a whole. And one of the issues I've had with people teaching tarot quite often is they almost see the cards as individual from each other. And Crowley sort of, not only with different systems, but I think even with the Kabbalah and the tarot as whatnot, saw it as one gigantic whole. And to me, that is hugely important. There's a quote he has early in the book where he says, "Meditate long and broad and deep, O man, upon the wheel, revolving it in thy mind. Be this thy task, to see how each card springs necessarily from each other card." And to me, that's such a good description of the way I see it. You know, if you understand that one card, then that card leads to the next card. And they do evolve. You know, if you're looking at the whole evolution of a suit from the ace through the tens, there is that evolutionary aspect to the energy that they evolve out of one another. And that's something that he was so good at clarifying, whereas I think other people just, they don't sort of see it that way.
I totally agree. And the introduction alone, similar to Magic in Theory and Practice, he has the first, I don't know, it's like the first 47 pages or so, he lays out these different arguments about the tarot, what it is with the Kabbalah, why it works with the Kabbalah, different aspects of the tarot, not much about the history, because I agree with this. He doesn't really feel it's relevant, that it really matters, that it is what it is. Even if not knowing the history, it works. And so you get a real sense of how he views the tarot with the Kabbalah as being essential. And when I reread that part recently, which is actually pretty lucid, most of it. There's only like a few paragraphs that have a little of that, lingo and strange equations or words in the first. It's a very good argument for why tarot and Kabbalah work together. And there's also some really great quotes just about tarot that I really liked. So for instance, there's this one quote on page 25 that the tarot is a pictorial representation of the forces of nature as conceived by the ancients according to a conventional symbolism. That's a very clear and a good angle to the tarot. Don't you think, Michael?
Yeah, and it really is the forces of nature when you understand the Kabbalah and the tarot. It's the mechanics of life, as far as I'm concerned. It's every possible experience you could have, simplified in terms of their basic understanding of how these experiences are perceived. And so it's all of that. It's just the mechanics. And if you understand that in theory, if you're trying to manifest a result, if you understand the nature of the forces and how to work with them properly, you have a much better chance of achieving a result that will be satisfying in theory, rather than if you just are buffeted by it. And there was a quote he had, I don't know if I have it here somewhere, that's sort of related to that too. I don't remember now, but he really talks about that a lot. It's just that it is connected to the forces of nature, and that's how I see it. And even when I'm doing readings, I see it. And that's one of the beauties of the tarot. It's not just a sort of a crass base tool, but it is teaching you the mechanics of life. And there's that deep philosophical underpinning of it that a lot of other systems, I just don't think it's there as much.
I agree. And one of the things about, not only is it good to read the Book of Thoth, but to read it over and over again, as you work with the cards, you begin to take more interest in certain aspects of the cards. And that's something, I really also appreciate about Crowley. He says in the beginning of the book that really you should be studying the tarot daily and also intelligently, because he says it's, quote, "it's universally elastic and grows in proportion to the use intelligently made of it. Thus it becomes a most ingenious and excellent method of appreciating the whole of existence." And honestly, when I read that sentence, I hadn't read that for a while. And I was like, oh, wow, that's exactly how I feel about Kabbalah with the tarot. That working with the two together, I have a different appreciation for existence than I had before it. And that one really knocked me off my socks this time. I said, that is so true. And I think that is one of the greatest arguments for why tarot with Kabbalah is superior in terms of tarot without it. And this is not to say you would not get a good psychic reading necessarily, because that's a different dimension to the tarot. But I feel like Kabbalah with the tarot teaches so much about life, and it advises you, it helps you, it supports you. Whether you want to do something magical with it or not doesn't matter. That again is just an element of it.
And there's this incredible, I mean, Crowley was, sorry, of course I have it. Crowley was in love with the tarot, clearly, and I think the I Ching both. He really elevated those two in particular. But he has this wonderful description of tarot at the end that I just wanted to read to you guys quickly. It says, "It being now established at the conclusion of the essay that the cards of the tarot are living individuals," and I think that that's so cool that he actually sees them as living beings, which I really feel they're that way as well. He said, "It is proper to consider the relations which obtain between them and the student. Consider the analogy of the debutante at her coming out ball. She is introduced to 78 grown people. Assuming her to be a particularly intelligent girl with a very high social education, she may know all about the position and general characteristics of these people. This, however, will not imply real knowledge of any one of them. She will have no means of saying how any one will react to her. At most, she can know only a few facts from which deductions may be made. It is unlikely, for example, that the VC will hide in a cellar if somebody thinks that there is a burglar in the house. It is improbable that the bishop will indulge in the more blatant types of blasphemy. The position of the student of the tarot is very similar. In this essay and in these designs is given the analysis of the general character of each card, but he cannot reach any true appreciation of them without observing their behavior over a long period of time. He can only come to an understanding of the tarot through experience. It will not be sufficient for him to intensify his studies of the cards as objective things. He must use them. He must live with them. They too must live with him. A card is not isolated from its fellows. The reactions of the cards, their interplay with each other, must be built into the very life of the student. And how is he to use them? How is he to blend their life with his? The ideal way is that of contemplation, but this involves initiation of such high degree that it is impossible to describe the method in this place. Nor is it either attractive or suitable to most people. The practical, everyday, commonplace way is divination. And I absolutely love that whole paragraph. To me, again, it so summarizes the tarot in ways that just show you kind of where I think Crowley was coming from when it came to the tarot.
I've always liked the part about the cards being living beings. In fact, I've had that experience with 3 particular cards that happen to be the trump cards. The first one was, that I remember, I was studying the tarot and I was working at the Bodhi Tree bookstore as a clerk. And I was sitting at the front and I was thinking a lot about the Fool, which Crowley spends a lot of time on the Fool in this book. He's really, the Fool is a big deal. And from different mythological stories. And so anyway, I'd been talking to someone about the Fool, and I was sitting there and this young man comes up to the front. I don't think he even bought anything. He looked a lot like the Fool from the Weight Deck. He had blonde curly hair. And when he put his hand up on the counter, he had a ring with the Joker on it. And I remember thinking, like, this is the Fool. This is the Fool come to life. And it was only because I felt the connection. I felt I'd been really thinking a lot about it. And I felt that I had evoked this archetypal symbol to come right up to me. So that was the first time that happened to me. And it was really exciting, kind of.
Yeah, and I think that really does happen as you work with the tarot. You sort of see them manifesting in your own life. And there's no doubt that it rewires kind of the way that you think in many respects, how you relate to life. And I think that's also one of the great gifts that comes with it, is the way it allows you to step out of life and look at it from a more distant perspective and just sort of detach from that immediacy of being involved in things to sort of get a better sense of how things operate. And to me, again, that's one of the great beauties of the tarot when you study it.
It's true. And when I think about it, I had another incident with the Fool in particular that was really fun. And I was doing a reading at the Bodhi Tree bookstore, and we used to read in this little sort of drab gray alley that was between the bookstore and the events. And we had sort of a plastic cover as the roof. And so you would often hear people in the events area, depending on how loud they were, which was fine. It wasn't distracting to me. And I was talking to the client about the card, the Fool, and it had been really dead quiet. And all of a sudden there was this hysterical laughter. And we both stopped and we looked and said, oh, and it really felt, again, in that moment, like an animation of the Fool. And I think Crowley would be really interested if he was alive in what was going on with the concept of the holographic universe and, time-space continuum. I think he was very interested in science. If you also look at what he says in the book, he talks a little bit about what was going on scientifically during that time.
Well, I think magicians in general, I think very much involved with almost science, alchemy and so forth. So I think that they view the world in almost the way a scientist does. That they're trying to sort of break things down into an understanding of things, a very specific formula for how to make things work. So for me, or why things happen the way that they do. So I think that the tie or the closeness between magic and science, I think that there is a very close relationship between those two things. And I think Crowley very much embodied that.
Absolutely. And he does talk about science being one aspect of magic in his definition of magic. So another thing I wanted to mention about this book was, I said earlier, once you read it once, it's really a great idea to keep coming back to it. In fact, Lon Milo Duquette says it's great to read once a year, and I think he's right. I haven't done that so much, but about 2 years ago, I decided to reread and really, really deeply read his descriptions of the court cards, because the court cards seem to be more complex in some ways. And even though I'm very comfortable with a lot of the interpretation Kabbalistically now, I still feel there's a lot in them a lot of times. And as far as I know, I think Crowley was the first one to really add the elemental side to the court cards, to see them as forces connected to the elements and not just descriptions of certain types of people, though they sometimes can be that. And even he has that. So I think he was the one that really made them more psychological too. And some people see it as the psychological types. There can be 16 types. But what I did was I really spent a lot of time thinking and pondering about each of the court cards. And as I did that, I did notice, particularly when I was working with the queens, certain things happening in my outer world, because again, I was reflecting deeply on certain parts of the book. And I really also really deeply appreciated some of his descriptions of the court cards this time, perhaps because I've been using the cards for so often. So for instance, the Queen of Swords, there's a line in the Queen of Swords, which by the way, is Crowley's sun sign. So it's in the same zodiac sign as it rules the 21st degree of Virgo to the 20th degree of Libra. So Crowley falls in that range. And so it's one of his cards. And in the description, it says, in her right hand, she bears a sword. In her left hand, the newly severed head of a bearded man. She is the clear, conscious perception of idea, the liberator of the mind. And I really love that line and that thought of liberating, and because a lot of people, for whatever reason, just see the Queen of Swords as a widower. That's it, And so he again has a more complex view of the court cards. And he goes and also describes what kind of person this person could be. And so again, it's not like he dismisses that idea.
Yeah, and another card that to me, and the way he describes it, and this is another good example with Crowley of where you have to really listen to what he's saying, and you have to kind of not take it too literally, but try and look at metaphorically and so forth is the Nine of Swords. And of course, the Nine of Swords is one of those cards that so many people just hate. And I still remember that one book I picked up that somebody said there must be something good about this card, but if there is, I can't find it. And I thought, well, that makes no sense to me. That's not what it's about when you understand it Kabbalistically. But in his description, he says the celestial ruler is Mars in Gemini, crude rage of hunger operating without restraint. Although its form is intellectual, it is the temper of the Inquisitor. The symbol shows 9 swords of varying length, all striking downward to a point. They are jagged and rusty. Poison and blood drip from their blades. There is, however, a way of dealing with this card, the way of passive resistance, resignation, the acceptance of martyrdom. Nor is an alien formula that of impeccable revenge, or implacable revenge, sorry. But, again, the whole idea of the Nine of Swords is the idea of not allowing our emotions to dictate our actions. So it has that sort of, he calls it cruelty in the sense that kind of detached, I'm going to do what's best, and if it hurts you too bad, I still have to do what's best. And now he talks about it as the Inquisitor in a sense. And the Inquisitor thought he was doing God's work by doing these horrible things. And to him, he didn't have a problem morally with that, so to speak, where we would look at it in horror, what was done and so forth. But again, even with this, it's you got to kind of look at what he's saying, but then still not take that too literally and say, okay, what is he really saying between the lines here? He's saying, okay, you have to do God's work. You have to do what's right. You have to do what's best. It's not about whether it causes pain or not. And so, you must be able to do these horrible things if that's what it takes to make things right. And so that's kind of what he's saying. And it's such a great description of the Nine of Swords in that way. But again, it's one of those things that if you take it extremely literally and you're just not looking at it in the broader context, I think it's very misleading. And to me, that was Crowley in a nutshell.
Very true. And there's also little tiny asides that you'll see his humor. So again, it was somewhere in the beginning of the very front of the book where he said he made the cards with no help from his parents or something really funny
wrote
like
the book
that.
with no help or
no
something.
help from his parents, and I love that he has these little humorous moments. And
yeah, he does. And another thing too is that he does poke fun at some of the traditional, what he thought were flawed ways of interpreting the tarot in the book. And the moon card, one of my favorites, he said, this is the threshold of life. This is the threshold of death. All is doubtful. All is mysterious. All is intoxicating. Not the benign solar intoxication of Dionysus, but the dreadful madness of pernicious drugs. This is a drunkenness of sense. After the mind has been abolished by the venom of the moon, this is that which is written of Abraham in the book of the beginning. A horror of great darkness came upon him. One is reminded of the mental echo of subconscious realization of that supreme inquiry which mystics have constantly celebrated in their accounts of the dark night of the soul. But the best man, the true man, do not consider the matter in such terms at all. Whatever horrors may afflict the soul, whatever abominations may excite the loathing of the heart, whatever terrors may assail the mind, the answer is the same at every stage. How splendid is the adventure.
How splendid is the I love
adventure.
That.
So what's cool about that is he's getting into all these traditional deception, it's madness, it's deceit, it's all these things that you see. And he's saying at the end of it, he's poking fun of that. He says, yeah, but what would life be without all of that stuff? And it's that whole idea of almost delving into the absurd in a sense of the moon card and to a great degree, but following your dream no matter how impractical it may be. And so sure, that may be lunacy to some, but it is the source of great adventure in our lives. And what would life be without adventure? And the moon card promises adventure, And so to me, that one paragraph, and like I said, that whole paragraph sets you up for one thing, and then at the end, he puts that twist in so you see it totally differently. But that I can't tell you how enlightening that paragraph was for me when it came to understanding the moon card.
I always loved the end of that. It's so striking and so Crowley. His poetic voice comes out in this book many times, and one of the things he even says somewhere in the beginning is how this project with Lady Frieda Harris renewed his interest and enthusiasm with tarot and magic, and it really is like that to read this book. There are moments where you feel his great enthusiasm and love, and it's very contagious. And oddly enough, I was thinking about why we were drawn to study the Kabbalah, and I had forgotten it was largely because of this book, because the first time I read it, I didn't remember a lot of it. I was like, oh, what was that book about? Again, there's just so much about alchemy, and I did know astrology, so I understood the astrology part when he talks about the correlations with the planets, but there's terms that are magical, there are abbreviations. So I looked at it and I said, oh, this is the real reason we even went that path, Michael and I. And I am so grateful for this book for that reason, because doing the tarot before the Kabbalah was not the same. We did it maybe a year and a half, or maybe 2 at the most, that we used the tarot without the Kabbalah. And I would say the Kabbalah with the tarot has really deeply impacted our lives in so many ways. And I'm still enthusiastic about it, the two together.
Yeah, for sure. Now, keep in mind, too, when you're reading the book, guys, that he definitely does refer sometimes to his order, to the OTO, some of the grades and so forth. And so in that respect, if you don't really understand his order or haven't partaken in it, which honestly we haven't, some of that stuff may kind of be unreachable. And there's certainly certain references he makes which I really don't get because I just haven't partaken in that. But that doesn't negate the rest of the book. And to me, that's only a small percentage of it. The greater wisdom. But the main thing when you're reading the Book of Thoth is to remember, again, he often speaks metaphorically. It's that great quote from Magic in Theory and Practice where Crowley says that, when an adept is speaking about one thing, you can be most assured that he's speaking about something else entirely. And so you always have to keep that in mind, when you're reading his book. And make sure you read between the lines, make sure you're really thinking about it, make sure you're not afraid to kind of take what he says and twist it a little bit to get the real meaning out of it and all that kind of stuff. And always be looking for the joke, always be looking for that little thing where, just to give you guys another example of that, he talks about the death card and his summations at the end. And he says, transformation, change, voluntary or involuntary, in either case, logical development of existing conditions, yet perhaps sudden and unexpected apparent death or destruction. But such interpretation is illusion. So here I'm going to tell you what it means. Now, forget everything I just said because it's not at all what it means. Now go figure out what it means he's saying, So I'm going to help you by telling you what it doesn't mean. So now that we've gotten rid of that, now you can go out and you can sort of try and figure it out what it means. And so that's the kind of way he wrote, and I think that you do have to use it as a jumping off point, but you do have to study it yourself as well and sort of come to those understandings. Kind of the way Crowley said, you have to work with it. You have to contemplate it. You have to meditate on it. And we did that a lot at the beginning. We would spend days talking about a particular card, what it meant, why it was where it was on the tree of life, and hours upon hours upon hours upon hours, working on that one card until we came to sort of an understanding of it. And then even to this day, it's like layers of an onion in the sense that the tarot still reveals itself. There'll be something that we'll see that I never quite saw that in that particular card before, another element of it. So I don't think that the learning ever ends necessarily with it. But I think Crowley will give you, or Crowley, I'm sorry, I apologize to all the OTO guys out there. It will give you such a great jumping off point if you can do it. But as I said, it's not an easy book to read, and you're going to have to really work to kind of wrap your head around some of it.
It's not, and yet there's a couple of other points I want to make about that. There is, I think it might have been Blavatsky who said that there are books written spiritually that you're supposed to approach not logically, and that they're not meant to be read in that way. And I think that the Book of Thoth, there's an aspect of that you can use where you just let it sink in, his words. And I'm a really big believer, being a avid reader and writer of poetry, that when you spend time with the original voice, instead of, say, someone only reading people that have commented on Aleister Crowley, which I am going to mention a couple of books that are helpful, that his voice comes into you. You start to feel the presence of his spirit through his words. And the more you read him, even if you just read, I tend to reread the same book. That's one of my things to really, enjoy a person's work. You really get a sense of their soul and their being. And I've had that experience with Blavatsky, reading about her, and Deanne Fortune. And that's why it's also really important to read his original works. But if you want some companions to understand, for instance, I think Lon Milo Duquette's book on his cards is most excellent. And I think it came out, after I'd started, and I didn't, see it right away. And that's a really good one. It's called Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, an authoritative examination of the world's most fascinating and magical tarot cards. And it's a great, great book if you want a companion book to understand Crowley, and he has especially the description of the back of the cards. He breaks it all down, in which Crowley doesn't do that in the Book of Thoth. I'm sure he does it elsewhere. And the other thing that came out fairly recently, if you just want to get a sense of Thelema for the ordinary person like me who's not a member of the OTO, there's a great book called Thelema, An Introduction to the Life Work Philosophy of Aleister Crowley by Colin D. Campbell, which I do mention in one of our earlier videos on sex magic. It's a really beautifully written book. He introduces some of the concepts, and then that's where I learned about Rose Kelly a lot more. It's very readable, and this, again, I think was his intention was to show that Thelema is not just for working ceremonial magicians. And many of you know that Crowley also believed that magic is for everyone, and why he broke his silence and his vows was he wants everyone to understand magic and not simply the ritual magicians. And that's why you can read this book and get things from it. And then again, as Michael said, some of it is really geared towards some of the students, understandably, that understand the degrees and the kinds of experience they're going through, the initiations.
Yeah, and then keep in mind too when you're reading it, it's I've often said once you've kind of gone through Book of Thoth and you've kind of wrapped your head around it, when you go to other books in the tarot, it's like going from Harvard to kindergarten. It's almost unsatisfying, the other books on the tarot in comparison, because there's so much there and there's so much richness to what he's doing. And then I think also with that particular book, it's up to you how far you want to take it. And one of the interesting things, of course, is he discusses so much mythology with the different tarot cards and so forth, and he'll make a reference to a certain mythological character. And again, you can take that and you can run with that and go start researching that character. And I think the more you get to know that character and his story, then you can relate it back to the tarot card. And it even adds another layer to it that way. So for me, it's also a primer in that sense that if you have the inclination and you want to start doing even more research beyond Crowley, he's giving you those starting points to say, go research, Dionysus, go research Set, and that's what this is all about. Wrap your head around that, and then you'll understand this even better.
Yeah, it's really great that way. You don't get bored with. That's one reason I love the Thoth Tarot, is that you don't get bored with it, and it also is the only deck I know of, at least from that period, like the early 1940s. Where he put minor astrology on all the cards, which he does explain some of that in this book, the correspondences, but you don't, you can just see it on the card. And I love that because I knew astrology, and it's a different way of viewing astrology through the visual pictures of the tarot. And I really, really like that about it. In fact, one of his other sort of and again, I think the Golden Dawn tradition does this, where they associate the court cards with the different deacons of astrology, and you can use that if you memorize it for timing of things. And again, it's a little complex initially, but you look for synchronicity with timing. If you notice that you have a court card that falls on a certain period. So, for instance, we talked about the Queen of Swords representing the deacon, the last deacon of Virgo, and the first two of Libra. And so you look at the time frame of that and see if it falls in that. So that's kind of a cool way of doing it. It's also a way of blending the astrology into the card to understand the forces of that nature. And it's simply, there's just no other deck that does that I'm aware of. Or if they do, it's maybe a mimic of his deck. And so I agree with him, and not from his egotistical point of view, is that his deck really was very original. And it took this great tarot system, which any decks before that are also really, really great and valuable. And he is basically saying, look, this is the deck for the new aeon, which is the aeon of Horus, the child. And I've only begun to really think about what that means to me. And I like that it represents a new aeon, this deck. And it makes you think about, well, what is that aeon? What is the difference between the aeon of the Osiris, the dying god, which personally I would like to be out of. I don't want to be in the dying god aeon. There's too much pain, it seems like. Or there's, people that want to go back to, the mother, the great mother period. I don't want to do that either because I feel we're supposed to evolve. And so because it also represents his deck, is a representation of a new aeon, we're still learning that. It's still early. The aeons are like 2,000 and some years. So we're still early in on it. So we've got a lot to go. And that way, if you look at it from that point of view, there might be experiences the cards help us understand different from other cards.
I should point out, too, that in the Book of Thoth, Crowley, he actually makes two changes to the tarot as well that he describes in detail his rationale behind doing it. And one was to change the positioning of the Star card and the Emperor on the Tree of Life. And I think that his rationale behind that, I think, to me, makes a lot of sense. I really buy into that. So in teaching the tarot with us, when we've taught it, we teach it that way. So we take the Golden Dawn tree, but then we transpose those two pathways. So the star and the emperor get interchanged with one another. And they are very similar energies, one being more manifest than the other, one being more etheric. But I think that his rationale is very, very good in that regard, and I think it's very correct. And then he changes the numbering on two of the cards, the strength card or lust in his deck with adjustment or justice. And in a traditional deck, strength would be an 8 and justice would be an 11 in his. He switches those two numbers. And I never quite bought into his explanation for that. To me, it never quite clicked with me. So I still tend to sort of see it as strength being an 8 and justice being an 11 in my mind. When I read his deck, I sort of ignore the numbers on it and come back to those. But again, those are two big major innovations he made to the tarot when he does lay out his rationale very clearly in the book for why he felt that those were correct changes. And you can argue with him or not, but at least you know where he was coming from.
Well, I like that, I reread the argument for it and I sort of understood, though I couldn't really in a nutshell explain it quickly, why he did the thing he did with the lust card and the adjustment card. What I like is that it's thought out. And one of Michael and our big argument is tarot as a system is a thinking system. It's an intelligent system, which does not mean you don't get psychic information through it, but it's something that I think should be thought out. And if you're going to significantly make changes to the layout on the Tree of Life, or you're going to make some really deeper changes to the archetypal image, I think there should be some kind of reason. And I think the tarot deserves that because of the lineage that it is. I'm all for innovation, and I collect decks because of, as an art form, you can argue that tarot, and it's a good argument, tarot is also an art form. So if you want to create an art deck that is used for the game of tarot that has no real connection to the symbols at all, I'm all for that. But I think there is a difference at this point in the history of tarot as to what is a legitimate occult or esoteric tarot deck. And why does that matter? Well, for some people, it won't matter. Some people, honestly, you could get a good psychic reading using, playing cards. Just there are many people that do that. So, and I'm one of these people, I feel like there's room for it all. I think there's room for the mundane and there's room for the esoteric. But for me, I think, being also a metaphysical student, I want the deeper rooted tarot because it teaches me things as a reader.
Yeah, and Crowley, of course, Crowley's book was meant to be intellectual, but he doesn't put down the psychic stuff either, and necessarily. And in fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in his deck, he mentioned somewhere that the colors and the geometric patterns that he created were very, very specific to sort of stimulate your psychic ability when you're working with his deck. So he wasn't putting that down. And I think to him, it's the marriage of the two. I think that he wouldn't want you to be using your your psychic abilities without some intellect involved in helping the understanding, but he wouldn't want to divorce the other way either. So I think that he really did value both.
Yeah, I think so. Whereas you sometimes feel like there's, at least in the modern world, there's this sort of snobbishness. Oh, you never should use the cards for prediction, which is, very interesting because even Waite in his book on the tarot, they have interpretations for people that will use it for predictions. So they weren't necessarily against it. I think that it's a natural thing if you're working with the tarot to want to go into all dimensions of it, to be curious about, well, what else can the tarot be? Or can I use it for improving my life? And I think that that's what's great about the Thoth, the Book of Thoth, is that it allows for you to have different angles with the tarot. And you get the sense that he just wants you to really get to know the tarot and not to dismiss it.
Yeah, and to look at it very objectively, which I think is one of his great gifts, and I think he prided himself on his intellect enough that he didn't want to be swayed by just irrational things. So he does look at the deck in a very rational light when it comes to the understanding, which I think is hugely beneficial. I think it's good to do that. And, I've often been appalled when people say, well, I just look at the cards and then whatever image, whatever it says to me, that's what it is. And it's like, plus I think that many readers, again, not putting people down, well, I suppose I am, but, that they just have the most base understanding of things. So for example, the suit of discs, they'll say, well, coins is always money. But that's not it. It's the suit of manifestation. Now, that could be money, yes, but it could also be just experience. It could be, accomplishing any goal, really, but it's just that's the suit of accomplishment or achievement or manifestation. It doesn't even have to be necessarily physical manifestation. I could be manifesting an attitude change or improving my confidence. And if I achieve a result, that result is the manifestation, without anything physical even being really attached to it. So he really does a good job of sort of getting away from some of the very base interpretations of some of the elements of the tarot into something that I think is much more holistic and frankly, much more satisfying.
Well, also in the Book of Thoth, he talks about each of us making the tarot into our own. It's a really great quote. He says at the end of that part 1, he talks about that it's basically a living being, and that it is for the student to build these living stones into his living temple. And that's, Dion Fortune also says that about Kabbalah, by the way. And one of the things about the interpretation of the cards in terms of divination is that if you look at some of the history, which you can kind of find some of it really easily, you'll see that some of the interpretations are based on very old history. So for instance, in the very beginning of the tarot, there was this idea that each of the suits was actually a class of people, and the discs represented merchants. And so, of course, it's evolved away from the class system as we have evolved away from the class system, at least so dramatically compared to like the 1700s, which is one of the earliest interpretations. You'll see the swords of nobility. The cups, by the way, were the priesthood. So that was very interesting. So we want to make the tarot a living system that will be relevant to our times as well. So to me, a lot of the old interpretations are stuck in a different time, and that's why, they're there and they don't really work. They won't also work over time.
And that sort of brings me to one of my pet peeves on tarot in general, and that's kind of the inbred nature of a lot of the books on tarot, where somebody said this is what it is, and that idea can never be challenged. It has to be set in stone, especially if that first person was sort of a respected authority. Whereas Crowley, unfortunately, Crowley never respected authority. That was one of the good things about Crowley. So he wasn't afraid to say, I think there's a better interpretation, or maybe you're not looking at this quite the right way. And to me, that's one of the great values in his book, is that he wasn't afraid to challenge those conventional ideas and set them on their head and sort of come at it from a very different point of view, which I think we try and do with our students as well. And that's one of the things that I know when we do classes that we have a hard time with, is that with students that have already read the tarot somewhat, is to convince them to forget what they've learned, because we're going to try and approach it from a very different point of view, and how they cling to what they think is the definition they've learned, and it's hard for them to open their mind to other possibilities. But Crowley was, God bless him, very good at that, and I think that he really did want to see the tarot evolve, and I think think that his work is probably the most single biggest evolutionary step in the tarot for a generation, and there were some great works before that laid the foundation for him. But at the same time, I think he really did take it another big step forward.
I agree. And Michael and I have discussed this privately, that we think that we're still in a period of the tarot where we're meant to be writing our own thoughts and experiences and interpreting what we were left with that renaissance of the esoteric tarot period. I mean, it was all clustered together from the Waite deck to Crowley and to Paul Foster Case. I feel there's still so much to decipher, so much rich thought during a time where they were actively working with the tarot in a way that most of us don't have time for. So I feel a deep connection to that period, and I really go back to there a lot and really start trying to draw more and more from it. And we're here, I think, not to make another new tarot deck, though again, as an art form, I understand why artists want to do it, like as an expression of an art. The tarot is very inspiring, and it's a lot of fun to see some of the artistic renditions, which I feel are kind of just an interpretation of the tarot.
I agree, and I've often said we don't really need another Rider-Waite deck in the world. If you can do something different with it, that's great. But no, I think that it's great to have greater interpretation and a much stronger, healthier debate as to what these cards actually represent. And certainly that's something I think we need more of in the tarot world. Whereas right now, as I said, I just don't see enough of that, to be honest. I see too many people copying, this person says that, so that's what it means. And you'll pick up 30 books in the tarot and they're all saying exactly the same thing. And I'm thinking, where's the debate? Where's this person saying, no, how about this? How about if we look at it this way? And I think that without that discourse, I think that the tarot isn't advancing the way that it really probably should. And I know we've just started writing our own book on the tarot, so hopefully we'll I'm not going to compare us to Crowley by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully we'll contribute a little bit to that process and try and move it in a slightly new direction for people. So we'll let you know somewhere down the road when that's finished, that project, but it's going to be a while, I suspect. We've got a lot of work to do, writing and editing and changing and all that good stuff before we're ready to put it out there into the world. But we definitely have a good start on it. So, but again, everything we're doing, so much of it stems from his work, and just trying to sort of explain it in a slightly different way or take it a step further. But without Crowley, again, I've often said we wouldn't be who we are, without his work.
I really agree. And I think that when I decided to primarily work with that deck, so in the beginning, by the way, I loved it too. I worked with the Robin Wood Tarot deck and I loved it. And then there was just something about his deck that kept calling me to work more deeply with it. And so I have been delving more into the actual symbols in the cards and what do I think about it. But honestly, just spending so much time with the cards and seeing how they affect people and the readings, what the patterns are, I've learned more experientially about what he's teaching. And I think that, is part of sharing knowledge, is the experience of working with those cards, which I've been very lucky to be able to do. And, to see so many different kinds of people and from different parts of life. So it teaches you something. It teaches you, well, that doesn't really work, or, wow, that's really different. Why is that like that? And because they really are very magical, I think, personally. And I think that also about the Waite deck. I think there's a magical element to it because of the intention these people put into the cards when they created it. And the magic might be different, but eventually it takes us to the truth, all of it. So there's no real judgment about which particular esoteric deck you would like to use. But there's something different about working with the esoteric side of tarot that's very rich and rewarding. And I encourage you, whether it's through Aleister Crowley, who we love, or one of the other decks, Paul Foster Case, and he has you color the cards. And I've met someone that did that, and she loves her deck still. She loves that she spent time coloring the cards. And that meant something a lot to her, a very soulful connection she made. So to me, that's what the Book of Thoth helps with. It's intelligent, it's rich, but it connects to your soul on some level, and you really can feel that in his writing, even if you are a little confused by it.
Yeah, another thing about Crowley, And keep in mind, too, it's a good thing. He wasn't afraid of the dark, so to speak. Now, please don't assume that he was an evil person and satanic and all that stuff. He really wasn't. He certainly liked to poke fun at what he saw as the hypocrisy of sort of that late Victorian Edwardian morality in England. He liked to kind of get in their face a little bit and so forth. I've often said he was the Charlie Sheen of that age. So not really evil, but certainly someone who liked to poke his thumb at good people in many respects who he felt were just hypocrites. And that's where a lot of that comes from. And he, of course, didn't mind playing that up either for attention and calling himself this wicked person. But when you read his writing, it's clear that he wasn't that. But a good tarot deck shouldn't be afraid of the dark, I've often said. And I think there has to be a balance. And if you look at his work, it can excite you, it can elate you, it can make you calm, it can get you anxious, it can move you emotionally all over the spectrum. And I think a great tarot deck can do that. It's one of those things that it can convey that whole experience of human life. And even in his writing in the book, you see that as he was describing the Nine of Swords, where, he could talk about it in different ways. It doesn't always have to be warm and fuzzy, or it doesn't always have to be dark and sinister. And it's that balance that I think he does bring to the tarot. And his deck is magnificent in that regard, is that it does encapsulate that whole human experience of emotional range, from the highest of highs to the lowest of despairs and everything in between. And to me, that's what a great tarot deck should do.
I love that. It's so true. And that the way Lady Frieda Harris captured it through her incredible paintings is, it's just hard to really fathom another deck that can do that. It came from a particular moment in time, from these two geniuses, and they put their whole being into something that took years, and they never really received any real reward, much of a reward for it. And I think that's another thing that it conveys, is that sometimes, just giving yourself to the work, no matter what rewards you get right away, is what's best. And if you want a little look into Aleister Crowley as a personality, then I would suggest you read the description of the Prince of Wands, which is, again, it falls in the degrees of his rising sign. And I chuckled when I read it. Like one line is, he is romantic, especially in matters of history and tradition, to the point of folly, and may engineer stunts or play elaborate practical jokes. And if that's not Aleister, and it's not all good. If you read the description, I had not known that until I read, I think it's Milo Duquette that points out that this is one of his cards too. And you can see him in that description, and it's delightful to see it there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that he was just, an incredible thinker, an incredible philosopher in so many respects. I think if you're going to be a serious student of the tarot, I think you've got to tackle that book at some point. I think it's just mandatory to kind of get to where he's coming from. You don't have to agree with him, or you don't have to agree with everything in it. I don't think he would want you to. But I think that you do yourself a disservice if you just completely, especially if you just do it with a preconceived notion that he's sort of a Satan worshiper and I can't even open the book to look at it. I think you're doing yourself a big disservice. And as I said, prepare yourself. Good news by Crowley, bad news by Crowley. So it's going to be a lot of riddles, a lot of metaphor, a lot of things that at first will seem gibberish, a lot of things hidden in gibberish. A lot of you got to get the inside joke kind of stuff to really understand where he's coming from. So you're going to have to wrap your brain around that, and it's going to hurt at times. There's going to be times where you're, what the hell did I just read? And we definitely went through that experience with him. But hang in there and stick with it, and keep trying to digest it, and keep looking, and you'll uncover those little nuggets. And every one of them is precious.
It's so true. And it's the first time, maybe because I know more about Western magic, even though I don't, again, practice it per se. I've read more about it. When I went back to read it recently, last 2 years, a lot more fluid for me and easy. And I enjoyed a lot of passages I did not enjoy before. So it's one of those things that kind of ripens with time. It gets better with time, and you really start to hear him, his presence. And I really enjoy that about any kind of a book, that you go back to it and it gives you more rewards. So we are getting closer to the end. Did you have any last thing you wanted to say, Michael?
No, not so much. If you guys want to connect with us and talk about tarot, please do.
That's
You can get our information on our website and our emails and stuff, and we do respond to our fans. So, and we love talking about tarot. So, if any of you guys want to hit us up and chat about it, we're really happy to make friends and connect over it, because it's been a passion of ours for many years now, and I don't think that will go away in the foreseeable future, that's for sure. We're definitely still very much in love with it after we've been working now, reading tarot and working with it for almost a quarter century, and we still just absolutely adore it. So it'll always be a part of our lives, I'm sure. So as I said, if you have any desire to connect with us, please do, and we'll love to chat with you guys. But I've had a lot of fun, and it's been fun doing our own show once in a while without a guest so that I get to participate a little bit more, and I'm always so busy just running things. But it's been a lot of fun, and I'm going to kick it back to Krista to take it away.
Thank you, Michael. It was a lot of fun talking about one of our favorite people, and we owe so much to him. And so please do yourself a favor. If you have not read that book, go out and read it. You can find it on many places. And I thank you all for supporting us, and for all of you that come for readings to help us understand the tarot more. I also thank you, because it really is a privilege to do readings for so many different people. So anyway, I look forward to continuing this journey with you and exploring the esoteric and the obscure together next time. Have a great week.